Who are you when no one is watching? Explore the Buddhist insight. Welcome to Buddhist Stories, your source for profound insights into Buddhist philosophy and the timeless wisdom that can guide us toward inner peace. Today, we are exploring one of the most intriguing and thought-provoking questions that has captivated philosophers, psychologists, and spiritual seekers for centuries. Who are you when no one is watching? This question might seem simple at first, but it goes much deeper than you might think. Have you ever paused to wonder who are you really when you are alone? Stripped of your roles, your labels, and the expectations of others. Are you the same person in private as you are in public? If no one is around to witness your thoughts, actions, and behavior, who are you then? And is there even a real you beneath the surface of these changing moments? This question takes us straight into the heart of Buddhist teachings, where we are invited to reconsider the very idea of self. Is the I that we so often identify with a permanent entity, or is it a fluid process? Buddhism offers a refreshing perspective on this question, one that reveals the illusion of a fixed, unchanging self and opens the door to a profound freedom found only when we understand the impermanent nature of our existence. As you ponder this question, I want to invite you to engage actively in this exploration. Do you believe you are the same person in all situations? Or do you think your true self changes depending on the moment? I'd love to hear your thoughts. Please type 1 if you think the real you remains constant, or 2 if you believe the real you shifts and evolves depending on the circumstances. Leave your answers in the comments below, and let's dive deeper into this fascinating topic together. Before we go further, let me take a moment to thank you for joining Buddhist Stories. Here, we delve into ancient wisdom with modern insight to help you live a more mindful, peaceful, and balanced life. If you're new to our channel, make sure to hit the subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss out on any of our enlightening content. So, let's return to the question at hand. Who are you when no one is watching? At first glance, it might seem like a trivial thought, but it is actually a profound question that gets to the very core of how we understand ourselves. Buddhist teachings suggest that when we strip away the roles we play, the labels we wear, and the masks we put on for others, the self we hold on to is not as fixed or permanent as we might think. Imagine this: you wake up in the morning and, for a few fleeting moments, you are not defined by your title, your job, your relationships, or your past. You are simply you, with nothing to cling to, just a series of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. But then, as the day goes on, you begin to identify with those roles again. The employee, the parent, the friend. You start to define yourself by these external factors. The question is, who were you when you first woke up? Are you really the same person when you're alone in your thoughts, compared to when you're around others? Buddhism teaches that we are often trapped in the illusion of a permanent I, a fixed self that remains the same throughout time. But as we look closer, especially from a Buddhist perspective, we begin to see that this I is not permanent. It is a collection of fleeting experiences, constantly changing. What does that mean for how we view ourselves and the world? Does it give us a sense of freedom, knowing that our self is not as rigid as we might have believed? How might our lives change if we truly understood that the I we hold on to so tightly is not as solid as it seems? In today's video, we will dive deep into the Buddhist perspective on this question. We will explore the teachings of the Buddha regarding the nature of the self, the illusion of a fixed identity, and how recognizing the impermanent nature of our existence can bring freedom and peace. Along the way, we will reflect on the essential Buddhist principles of impermanence, no self, anatta, and dependent origination, which together reveal the truth behind the question, who are you when no one is watching? But before we go further into this exploration, think about this. Why do we hold on so tightly to the idea of a permanent self? Could it be because we fear that without this solid I, we will be lost, floating aimlessly in the world? Or could it be that we feel safer, more secure, when we can define ourselves clearly? And yet, the Buddha tells us that the only thing that is truly certain is the impermanent nature of all things, including the self. Are you ready to embrace this liberating truth? Can you imagine how different your life might be if you could let go of the need to define yourself? How would it feel to live each day without the weight of a rigid identity holding you back? To be free from the fear of loss or change? What would it look like if you could live in the present, just as you are, without worrying about who you should be? Let's take a deep dive into the Buddhist understanding of the self and explore how embracing the impermanence of life can offer true liberation. Stay with us, because by the end of this video, you might just discover something surprising about who you really are. And remember, your answers in the comments will help us shape the discussion further. What do you think? Are we the same person in all situations? Or is the real self always changing? Let's hear your thoughts below. Stay tuned, because the journey of self-discovery begins right here. And you won't want to miss what's coming next. In Buddhism, the idea of a fixed, permanent self is a deep illusion that keeps us trapped in suffering. As the Buddha taught, our attachment to this notion of a constant I is the root of much of our pain, confusion, and anxiety. The very nature of existence, as revealed through the teachings of the Buddha, points to impermanence and fluidity as the essence of life. So, when we ask, who are we when no one is watching? We are actually probing into the core of this illusion. Let's journey together through this profound realization, with a reflection on Buddhist philosophy, real-life stories, and practical wisdom to free ourselves from this bondage. The Buddha's teachings on the self. Buddhism doesn't teach the existence of a fixed, eternal soul, or self. Rather, it suggests that what we perceive as I is actually an aggregation of 5 constantly changing elements, known as the 5 aggregates, skandhas: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These 5 components are in a constant state of flux, and each moment, these aggregates arise, interact, and dissolve, creating the illusion of a stable self. Time's form, apa, refers to our physical body, which is ever-changing. Every day, we age, we heal, we grow, and we decay. In the blink of an eye, our bodies change, from one breath to another. We lose cells, and we gain new ones. Time's sensation, Vedana, involves our feelings, the immediate experience of pleasure, pain, or neutrality. These sensations arise in response to external stimuli, and often fade away quickly, revealing their transient nature. Time's perception, sa, represents how we categorize and recognize the world around us. It's how we filter our experiences through our senses, and yet this too is constantly shifting as our perspectives change. Time's mental formations, sakra, are the mental habits, intentions, emotions, and thoughts that arise. Our thoughts and mental states are not fixed, they evolve, arise, and fade in each moment, influenced by past experiences and future expectations. Time's consciousness, vaya, is the awareness that experiences everything. It too is not a fixed, permanent entity but a dynamic process that observes, yet is itself ever-changing. Taken together, these 5 aggregates point to an undeniable fact. Everything that constitutes you is impermanent, constantly shifting, and subject to the laws of change. This means that the self is not something fixed or solid but a flowing, ever-changing process. The sense of I is merely the result of these aggregates temporarily coming together. The illusion of a fixed self. Why do we feel like there's a permanent you when everything around us is constantly shifting? The answer lies in our attachments and beliefs. We cling to the idea of a permanent self because of deep-rooted habits and social conditioning. We use the word I to refer to ourselves, as if it were a solid, tangible entity. But the Buddha's teachings remind us that this I is just a concept, a mental construct we rely on to make sense of the world. In the West, the philosopher René Descartes' famous declaration, "I think, therefore I am," points to the belief that the act of thinking is proof of a stable, unchanging self. But Buddhism challenges this belief. The Buddha taught that thoughts come and go by themselves. They arise out of nowhere and dissolve without the need for a permanent thinker. Thoughts don't need a self to exist. And consciousness does not need an I behind it to observe. The reality of our existence, then, is the direct experience of change. Thoughts come, feelings arise, and the body ages. These experiences don't need an unchanging self to hold them together. The sense of I is simply the result of the continual arising and passing away of these experiences. And when we stop identifying with this fleeting, impermanent process, we begin to see the truth. The illusion of the self dissolves, and we experience the freedom that comes with this realization. The story of the monk and the river. To better understand this Buddhist concept, let's reflect on a story of an ancient monk who lived in a small temple near a river. Every morning, the monk would walk to the riverbank, sit quietly, and meditate. He would watch the water flow, observing how it never stayed the same. Every drop of water that passed by was a new drop, flowing onward, and never to return again. The monk saw how the water mirrored life itself, constantly flowing, changing, and renewing. One day, a traveler came to the monk and asked, "Master, I have heard that you meditate by the river every day. What do you find there that brings you peace?" The monk smiled and motioned for the traveler to sit beside him. As they both watched the water, the monk said, "Look at the river. See how it never stops, always flowing, always changing, but never losing its essence." The traveler replied, "Yes, the river is always in motion, but it is still the river." The monk turned to him and said, "Just as the river is always changing but never loses its essence, so too are we. Our body, our thoughts, our feelings, they are always changing. Yet we hold on to the illusion of a fixed self. But when we recognize that we are like the river, changing, flowing, and impermanent, we find peace in this truth." The traveler, though puzzled at first, began to reflect on the monk's words. He realized that in his own life, he had always been trying to hold on to a fixed identity, fearing change and loss. But in the monk's simple words, he found a sense of freedom. The river did not need to cling to its water, and neither did he need to cling to his identity. There was peace in recognizing the ever-changing nature of existence. Buddhism and the nature of change. The core message here is that the nature of all things is impermanent. Everything in our world, our bodies, our emotions, our thoughts are in a constant state of flux. Holding on to the idea of a permanent self only brings suffering, because we are fighting against the natural flow of life. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to see things as they truly are: impermanent, interdependent, and ever-changing. Buddhism teaches that all suffering arises from attachment to the self. Attachment to things, attachment to desires. When we let go of these attachments and accept the impermanence of life, we begin to experience true freedom. The constant need to define ourselves, to prove who we are, and to hold on to a rigid sense of identity only creates anxiety and fear. But when we let go of this, we open ourselves to a deeper sense of peace and acceptance. Practical ways to embrace change. The Buddha's teachings are not merely philosophical. They provide practical guidance for living in harmony with the ever-changing nature of life. Here are some steps to embrace change and let go of the illusion of a permanent self. 1. Practice mindfulness and awareness. One of the most powerful tools in Buddhism is mindfulness, simply being present with the flow of life. By practicing mindfulness, we can become more aware of the impermanent nature of our thoughts, emotions, and experiences. Instead of clinging to them, we can observe them without attachment, knowing that they are temporary. 2. Meditate on impermanence. Meditation is a core practice in Buddhism, and one of the most profound meditations is to reflect on impermanence. Sit quietly and observe the changing nature of your body, thoughts, and emotions. Notice how everything is in constant motion, and allow yourself to feel the freedom that comes from this realization. 3. Let go of the desire for control. Much of our suffering comes from the need to control our lives and our circumstances. We want to hold on to our identity, to define ourselves, to control the future. But this desire for control is futile, because life is constantly changing. Instead of resisting change, learn to flow with it. For embrace interconnectedness. In Buddhism, everything is interconnected. The self is not an isolated entity but part of a vast, ever-changing web of existence. When we recognize our interconnectedness with others and the world around us, we release the illusion of separateness and experience a deep sense of peace. A call to action: reflect on your true nature. So, when you ask yourself, "Who am I when no one is watching?" the answer may not be as simple as you think. The self is not a fixed, permanent entity but a process in constant change. And as we embrace this truth, we open ourselves to a deeper freedom, a freedom from the need to define ourselves, from the fear of change, and from the suffering that comes with attachment. As you reflect on this, take a moment to ask yourself, how can I embrace the impermanence of my life? How can I let go of the need to control and define myself? The journey towards understanding our true nature is a path of liberation from attachment, from suffering, and from the illusion of a permanent self. Join me in embracing this journey. Take the first step today by practicing mindfulness, letting go of the need for control, and reflecting on the ever-changing nature of your existence. When you let go of the need for a fixed self, you open yourself to the flow of life, and with it, a profound sense of peace and freedom. Remember, the river of life is always flowing. Embrace its flow, and you will find the peace that comes from recognizing your true nature. To the illusion of a permanent self. A deep dive into Buddhist teachings. In our everyday lives, we often feel a sense of self. Something permanent and unchanging. Something that feels like the core of who we are. This feeling of a fixed identity is so deeply ingrained in us that we rarely question it. However, as we explore the teachings of the Buddha, we are led to question this very notion: is there truly a permanent self at the core of our being? Or is it an illusion that we have unconsciously clung to? In this exploration, we will look at how Buddhism presents this idea and the profound implications it has for our lives. We will also walk through stories, examples, and practical ways to understand and embody the Buddhist teachings on impermanence and the illusion of the self. The illusion of the I in language and memory. The first reason we continue to feel a self is because of the language we use. We refer to ourselves with the pronoun I, and because of this, we feel that there must be something solid and unchanging behind the label. But the truth is that the word I is merely a mental construct, a label that we use to identify ourselves in the world. It doesn't signify a fixed, permanent entity but merely the process by which we perceive our existence at any given moment. The word I is a part of our social fabric. But when we reflect deeply, we can see that it doesn't correspond to a tangible, unchanging self. Another reason we continue to cling to the idea of a fixed self is our memory. We tend to identify ourselves by remembering past experiences. assuming that the person who experienced those events must still be the same. We look back on our childhood, our past achievements, and our previous relationships. And we believe that they are an unchanging part of our identity. Yet, this memory is not a complete reflection of who we are. Just as a person can change physically and mentally over time, our memories, too, are filtered through the lens of our evolving self. The Buddha, in his profound wisdom, teaches us that the idea of a permanent self, a core I that remains unchanged, is an illusion. It is a source of suffering because we grasp at something that does not exist. Our identities are fluid and impermanent, shaped by the constant flow of experiences, conditions, and interactions. By holding on to the idea of a fixed self, we are resisting the natural flow of life. This resistance causes suffering, as we try to cling to something that is constantly changing. Let us take the example of a candle. The candle burns through the night, and as the flame flickers and the wax melts, the form of the candle is altered. By morning, the candle is not the same as it was the night before. Yet, we still call it the same candle. We assign the same name to the object, even though its form has changed. This is how we identify with ourself. We believe we are the same person we were in the past, even though our body, our mind, and our experiences have all changed. This belief in a permanent self is the illusion that the Buddha encourages us to let go of. The constant flow of life, embracing change. One of the most powerful metaphors for understanding the impermanent nature of the self is the image of a river. Imagine sitting by the bank of a river, watching the water flow steadily, never stopping. Each moment, the river is different. The water you see now is not the same as the water you saw just a moment ago. If you try to hold on to the water, you will only be frustrated. The water will slip through your fingers and continue to flow, never the same again. In the same way, our lives are like this river. We are constantly changing. Our bodies change, our thoughts change, our emotions fluctuate, and even our perceptions evolve. Just as the water in the river cannot be held in one place, we cannot hold on to a fixed identity. We are part of the flow of life, and like the river, we are always in motion. But the illusion of a permanent self creates resistance. We fight the natural flow of life, trying to hold on to something that does not exist. This creates suffering, as we become anxious about losing our identity or fear the changes that life brings. In Buddhism, we are encouraged to let go of this resistance, and instead embrace the fluid nature of existence. When we stop trying to hold on to a fixed identity, we open ourselves to the freedom that comes with impermanence. The Buddha taught that attachment is the root of suffering. We attach ourselves to our bodies, our thoughts, our emotions, and even our memories. We cling to them, thinking that they define who we are. But when we realize that everything is impermanent, we can learn to let go of these attachments and embrace the flow of life. This doesn't mean that we lose our sense of self, but rather, we begin to understand that our self is not something fixed and unchanging. It is a process, an unfolding, a continuous transformation. The Buddhist concept of Anatta, no self. One of the central teachings in Buddhism is the concept of Anatta, which means no self. According to this teaching, there is no permanent, unchanging self. Instead, what we experience as self is simply the combination of the 5 aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, that are constantly changing. This process is known as dependent origination, the idea that everything arises in dependence upon conditions and ceases when those conditions change. This teaching challenges the very core of our beliefs about who we are. We are often taught to define ourselves by our job, our relationships, our achievements, or our appearance. But the Buddha teaches us that these things are not who we truly are. They are merely temporary aspects of our experience that come and go. By letting go of our attachment to these aspects, we can experience a deeper, more profound sense of freedom. Imagine a tree. The tree grows from a small seed into a large, towering figure. Over time, the tree's leaves change, its branches grow and shift, and its bark ages and transforms. But the tree is not fixed, it is constantly evolving, adapting, and renewing itself. The same is true for us. We are not static beings, we are constantly growing and changing. Our experiences, our thoughts, our emotions, they all shape who we are, but they do not define us. We are part of the larger flow of existence, constantly changing, just like the river or the tree. Letting go of the illusion of the self, practical steps. So, how can we begin to let go of the illusion of a permanent self and embrace the fluidity of life? Buddhism offers practical steps that we can apply in our everyday lives to begin the process of transformation. 1. Mindfulness meditation. The practice of mindfulness helps us to become aware of our thoughts, emotions, and sensations without attaching to them. By observing the impermanence of our experiences, we begin to understand that they do not define who we are. Through regular meditation, we learn to let go of the need to identify with our thoughts and emotions, allowing them to come and go without clinging to them. To embrace change, one of the most powerful ways to free ourselves from the illusion of a permanent self is to embrace change. Instead of resisting the changes in our lives, we can see them as opportunities for growth. Life is in constant flux, and each moment is an opportunity to learn, adapt, and transform. By accepting change, we let go of the need to hold on to a fixed identity. 3. Reflect on impermanence. Reflecting on the impermanence of all things can help us release our attachment to a fixed self. By contemplating the fact that everything changes, our bodies, our thoughts, our experiences, we begin to understand that nothing is permanent. This realization helps us to detach from the idea of a solid I and embrace the flow of life. 4. Live in the present moment. The present moment is the only moment that truly exists. By living in the present, we stop worrying about the past or the future. We stop identifying ourselves by what we were or what we hope to become. Instead, we simply experience life as it is, without attachment to a fixed identity. The story of the old monk and the changing river. There is a story of an old monk who lived in a remote monastery by the river. Every day, the monk would sit by the riverbank, observing the water flow. One day, a young man came to the monk and asked, "Master, how do you find peace in the ever-changing world? The world is full of turmoil, and everything around me seems to be constantly shifting. How can I find stability?" The old monk smiled and motioned for the young man to sit beside him. They both sat in silence for a while, watching the river flow. The monk then spoke, "Look at the river. See how the water flows without resistance. Each drop of water is new, and yet it is still part of the river. It does not try to hold on to the past. It simply moves forward, embracing the flow of life." The young man listened intently and asked, "But how can I, too, embrace change without losing myself?" The monk replied, "You are like the river. You are not a fixed being, but a part of the ever-flowing stream of life. When you stop trying to hold on to the past, when you stop fearing the changes that come, you will find peace in the flow of life. Embrace the impermanence of all things, and you will discover the freedom that comes with it." In that moment, the young man understood. He realized that his fear of change was rooted in his attachment to a fixed self. He had been clinging to an identity that no longer served him. By letting go of that attachment, he could embrace the present moment and the flow of life. Just as the river embraced the constant movement of its waters. Call to action. Just as the young man learned from the old monk, we, too, can embrace the teachings of Buddhism and release our attachment to a permanent self. As you reflect on your own life, ask yourself, how can I let go of the illusion of a fixed identity? How can I embrace change and find peace in the flow of life? Through mindfulness, reflection on impermanence, and living in the present moment, we can all experience the freedom that comes from embracing the fluid nature of existence. If you're ready to take the first step towards this freedom, join me in this journey of self-discovery. Subscribe to explore more teachings on impermanence, mindfulness, and the path to true freedom. Let go of the illusion of a fixed self, and embrace the flow of life just as the river does. 3. Who is watching? The nature of awareness in Buddhist philosophy. In the deep silence of meditation or the busy rhythm of daily life, one question often arises. Who is watching? Who is the one experiencing life? Perceiving the world, thinking, and feeling? Is there truly a self behind all of these experiences? An observer that stands apart from the world, quietly witnessing all that unfolds? This question touches the very core of Buddhist philosophy and its teachings on awareness, self, and the nature of consciousness. It invites us to explore the nature of our perception, the illusion of the self, and the true meaning of awareness. The illusion of the internal observer. When we sit in quiet contemplation, Many of us feel as though there is an internal watcher within an observer who is separate from the world, but seems to sit behind our eyes, witnessing the flow of thoughts, feelings, and sensations. This watcher often feels like the true self, the center of consciousness, the one who is aware of the world and its happenings. But is this watcher real? Or is it an illusion? Is there a fixed self behind our awareness? Or is awareness itself something that simply arises on its own, independent of a permanent observer? Modern neuroscience, despite its vast advancements, has yet to locate a single watcher in the brain. It has not found a single place where this internal observer resides. Instead, neuroscience reveals that thoughts emerge from different areas of the brain. Emotions are processed in multiple regions, and memory is stored across various neural networks. The brain is not a central control system with a little person inside it managing all the experiences. It is a dynamic, ever-changing process. This insight aligns closely with the teachings of Buddhism. In Buddhist philosophy, the concept of an internal observer, the sense that there is a permanent I behind the experience, is called the false view of self. The mind believes that because there is awareness, there must be a self who is doing the awareness. However, Buddhism teaches that awareness itself is not owned by anyone. It does not belong to a fixed self, but simply unfolds by itself, just like light illuminating a room without belonging to any one object. The river of awareness, a Buddhist metaphor. To better understand this concept, imagine sitting by a river, watching the water flow. The river is constantly moving, never the same for 2 consecutive moments. As you watch the water flow, you notice that thoughts and sensations also pass through your mind in a similar way, constantly changing, flowing, and dissolving. Just as the water in the river is never static, neither are your thoughts or feelings. But here lies the key question. Where is the you in all of this? Are you the water itself, constantly changing and flowing? Are you the observer sitting by the river, watching it pass by? Or, as Buddhism suggests, are you both the water and the observer, and yet neither? This question takes us deep into the heart of Buddhist meditation practices. In deep meditation, many practitioners report an experience of the dissolution of the separation between the observer and the observed. There is no longer a self that is separate from the world. There is only seeing, hearing, feeling without the need for a separate self to control or own these experiences. Consider this experience through the teachings of the Buddha. In the samsara, the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth, our perceptions and thoughts are like the flowing river. The I or self that we cling to is like the shore of the river, a mental construct that we falsely believe is separate from the flowing current of life. Buddhism teaches us that the separation between the observer, the I, and the observed, the world, is an illusion. In truth, we are not separate from the world, nor are we fixed, independent beings. We are, like the river, part of the ever-flowing process of life, constantly changing, constantly in motion. The Buddha's teachings on awareness and the self. Buddhism teaches us that awareness itself is not a product of a permanent self. In fact, the concept of a permanent self is one of the core illusions that bind us to suffering. The Buddha's teachings on Anatta, or no self, reveal the truth. There is no unchanging, permanent self at the core of our being. Instead, our sense of self is a collection of constantly changing elements. The five aggregates: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness, that come together momentarily and then dissolve. Let us consider the Buddha's teaching on dependent origination. This teaching tells us that all things arise due to causes and conditions. Just as the river is dependent on the terrain, the weather, and the flow of water to exist, so too is our experience of self dependent on various conditions, such as our thoughts, emotions, and physical body. When these conditions change, our experience of self changes as well. This is why the Buddha taught that attachment to a permanent self leads to suffering. It is an attachment to something that does not truly exist. This false sense of self, the idea that there is a fixed I behind our awareness, is the source of much of our confusion and pain. When we believe that there is a permanent observer inside us, we cling to this identity, trying to protect it, define it, and hold on to it. But as the Buddha points out, when we release this attachment to a fixed self, we experience freedom. A Buddhist story: the monk and the empty boat. There is a story in Buddhist tradition that illustrates the illusion of the self and the nature of awareness. Once, a young monk set out on a boat, traveling across a serene lake. As he drifted, a large boat suddenly struck his own, causing the young monk to lose his balance and nearly fall into the water. Furious, he immediately turned to the person on the other boat and began to shout and curse. But the person in the other boat remained silent, unmoved. The monk, now even more enraged, shouted even louder, demanding that the other person respond. After a long silence, the other person finally spoke. "My dear friend, there is no one in this boat. It is an empty boat." The young monk, startled, suddenly realized that the boat had no person in it, only a drifting, empty vessel. The anger he had felt was based on an illusion, a false assumption that the boat contained another person. With this realization, the monk stopped shouting, and a deep calm began to settle in. This story is a powerful metaphor for our perception of self. The monk's anger arose because he mistook the empty boat for a vessel with a person inside. In the same way, we often mistake the self for something solid and permanent, when in fact it is empty, ever-changing, and dependent on conditions. When we let go of the false belief in a permanent self, we, too, can experience a deep calm, just as the monk did when he realized the boat was empty. Awareness unfolding without a self. As we continue to explore the nature of awareness, we see that true awareness is not owned by anyone. It does not belong to a fixed self, but is a dynamic, unfolding process that arises and passes away with each moment. In meditation, this becomes evident. As we sit in stillness, we begin to notice that thoughts and feelings arise on their own. They come and go without any I controlling them. This awareness, which observes all experiences, is not a personal entity. It is simply the presence of awareness itself, vast and open, allowing all phenomena to arise and dissolve naturally. Buddhism teaches that this awareness is the key to liberation. When we cease identifying with a false sense of self, and instead recognize awareness as an open, undivided process, we are free. We no longer need to protect, defend, or assert our identity. We no longer need to hold on to the idea of a fixed I that is separate from the world. Instead, we can simply be present, experiencing life as it unfolds. This realization brings with it freedom from suffering. When we no longer cling to the illusion of a permanent self, we stop fighting against the natural flow of life. We accept things as they are, without resistance, and we live fully in the present moment. In this space, there is no longer an observer. Behind our awareness there is just awareness itself, ever present and free. Practical steps for letting go of the illusion of the self. So, how can we let go of the illusion of a fixed self and truly embrace the fluid, ever-changing nature of awareness? Buddhism offers practical methods that help us cultivate this awareness. 1. Mindfulness meditation. Regular mindfulness practice helps us observe the ever-changing nature of our thoughts, feelings, and perceptions. By observing these phenomena without attachment, we can begin to see that they arise and pass away naturally, without the need for a fixed self to control them. 2. Contemplating impermanence. Reflecting on the impermanence of all things, the body, the mind, the world, helps us realize that nothing is permanent. Everything is in constant flux, including the self. By accepting this impermanence, we can release our attachment to a fixed identity. 3. Non-attachment to thoughts. Realizing that thoughts are not personal, that they arise and pass away without any fixed I behind them, is a crucial step in letting go of the illusion of the self. When we stop identifying with our thoughts, we can experience true freedom. 4. Living in the present moment. By focusing on the present moment and accepting life as it is, we stop worrying about who we are or what we should become. We simply experience the flow of life without resistance. Call to action. Embrace the flow of life. As we move forward in this journey, let us reflect on the question: who is watching? Are we truly separate from our experiences, or are we a part of the flow of life? The Buddha teaches that when we release our attachment to a permanent self, we experience true freedom. This freedom is the key to liberation from suffering. If you are ready to embrace this truth, take a moment to sit in stillness. Reflect on the impermanence of your thoughts, your emotions, and your body. Realize that there is no fixed self behind them, and that you are part of the ever-changing flow of existence. Let go of the need to protect or defend your identity, and simply be present with life as it is. If you are ready to explore this path further, subscribe to our teachings. Allow the wisdom of the Buddha to guide you toward the realization of your true nature, where, free and ever-present, embrace the flow of life, and experience the peace that comes from recognizing that awareness is not owned by anyone but simply is. for the interconnectedness of all things in Buddhist philosophy. In the heart of Buddhist teachings, one of the most profound and transformative insights is the realization of the interconnectedness of all things. It is a truth that runs through the very fabric of existence. Nothing exists in isolation. Every single phenomenon arises due to a web of causes and conditions. This principle, known as dependent origination or interdependent origination, Paticca Samuppada in Pali, teaches us that all things are interconnected and that nothing stands alone. It challenges our conventional belief in separateness, and invites us to experience the world in a new light, where boundaries between ourselves and the world around us are far less rigid than they appear. Interdependent origination, a Buddhist perspective on the universe. In the Buddhist view, the entire universe is a vast and intricate web of interconnected phenomena. Every event, action, and even thought arises because of a series of causes and conditions. And it is in this interrelationship that the nature of existence can be fully understood. The Buddha's teaching of interdependent origination reveals that nothing exists independently of everything else. And it is this interconnectedness that forms the basis of our shared reality. This concept runs counter to the commonly held view that we are isolated beings, separate from the world and others. We tend to see ourselves as distinct, as individual selves with boundaries between us and the rest of the world. But this is an illusion. The true nature of our existence is that we are deeply intertwined with the world, and the world is intertwined with us. Take a moment to consider the very air that you breathe. The air you are inhaling right now was once part of a tree, part of the atmosphere, part of the breath of other living beings. A few moments ago, it circulated through the trees, passing through the leaves and into the world, until it eventually made its way into your lungs. Once inside, it mixes with the oxygen in your body and contributes to your life force. Then, in a short while, it will leave your body again and return to the environment, continuing its endless journey, influencing the world and other living beings. In this simple act of breathing, we see the profound truth of interdependence. The air you breathe is not truly yours, it is part of the world, constantly cycling through the environment. Your body is not a self-contained unit, but a vessel constantly exchanging atoms and molecules with the world around it. This example serves as a powerful reminder that we, too, are part of a larger whole. Our experiences, our thoughts, our feelings, and even our physical forms are interconnected with the entire universe. The web of life, a Buddhist metaphor. To illustrate this interconnectedness more deeply, let's turn to a metaphor that captures the essence of dependent origination. The image of a spider's web. Imagine a vast web spun by a spider, intricately woven with threads that stretch across great distances. At the center of this web is the spider itself. But every thread of the web is connected to another. Every movement of one thread affects the entire web. If a part of the web is disturbed, the vibrations will be felt throughout, and the entire structure will be influenced. This web is similar to the way in which all phenomena arise. Each action, each thought, Each moment of awareness is like a thread in the web of life, interwoven with all others. If you act with kindness, the ripple of your actions may affect others in ways you cannot see. If you are harsh or unkind, that too will ripple through the web, influencing the environment and others around you. In this way, our actions are never isolated. They are always interconnected with the world and with the people we encounter. The Buddha, in his teachings, often compared life to a vast net, with every individual being a knot in that net. Each knot, or individual, is part of the whole, and each part depends on the others for its existence. The web is vast and infinitely intricate, and it is within this network that our actions find their meaning and influence. The illusion of separateness. Understanding the boundaries of self. One of the primary illusions we face in our daily lives is the belief in separateness. We tend to think of ourselves as isolated beings, separate from others and from the world around us. This sense of self as a fixed, independent entity is deeply ingrained in our thinking. We identify ourselves by our name, our body, our possessions, and our thoughts. And we often forget that we are part of a much larger system. This illusion of separateness is a source of much suffering. When we believe that we are separate from the world, we begin to act as though our desires, our needs, and our fears exist independently of everything else. We seek to protect ourselves, to defend it against the world, to accumulate wealth, status, and power. But all of this is an illusion. The reality is that we are deeply interconnected with the world and with others. What we do, how we act, and what we think all have consequences that extend far beyond our individual existence. Consider, for example, the food we eat. Every meal we consume is not just the result of a simple transaction between buyer and seller. It is the product of an entire system of interconnections, the seeds that were planted in the soil, the farmers who cultivated the crops, the transportation systems that brought the food to market, and the people who prepared it. Each meal is the result of countless individuals working together in harmony, often without even knowing each other. By recognizing this interconnectedness, we dissolve the illusion of separateness. We begin to understand that our actions are part of a larger, interconnected process, and that we are not isolated from the world. When we live with this understanding, we begin to cultivate compassion for others, realizing that their suffering and happiness are intimately connected with our own. The Buddhist path, embracing interdependence. Understanding the interconnectedness of all things is a crucial step on the Buddhist path. The Buddha's teachings encourage us to cultivate awareness of this interconnectedness, and to act with mindfulness and compassion. When we recognize that everything is interdependent, we begin to see that our actions, however small, can have a profound impact on the world. One mindful consumption, in a world where consumerism often leads to environmental degradation and suffering. Mindful consumption becomes an essential practice. By understanding that the food we eat, the products we use, and the resources we consume are all interconnected with the world, we begin to make choices that reflect this awareness. We can choose to live in ways that support sustainability, fairness, and harmony with the environment. To compassionate action, when we recognize that the suffering of others is intimately connected with our own. We are called to act with compassion. We no longer view others as separate from ourselves but as part of the same interconnected web. This insight leads us to act in ways that alleviate suffering, whether through direct action, kind words, or simply holding space for others in times of need. Compassion is the natural outcome of recognizing our interconnectedness. 3. Generosity and selflessness. When we understand that everything is interdependent, we begin to realize that what we give to others, we are also giving to ourselves. Generosity becomes a natural expression of the awareness that we are all part of the same system. This generosity extends beyond material possessions and includes our time, our attention, and our energy. 4. Letting go of ego. The belief in a separate, fixed self is one of the greatest obstacles to spiritual growth. When we let go of the ego, we begin to see ourselves as part of the larger whole. This shift in perspective frees us from the need to protect our personal identity, and allows us to embrace the flow of life as it is. We begin to live in a way that is not driven by the fear of separateness or the desire for individual gain, but by the recognition that our well-being is tied to the well-being of others. A Buddhist story, The Seed and the Flower. To illustrate the concept of interdependence, let us turn to a beautiful Buddhist story. There was once a small seed, buried deep in the earth, surrounded by darkness and silence. The seed felt isolated and alone, wondering if it would ever grow. It had no idea what the world outside was like, and felt lost in its tiny, enclosed space. One day, the seed felt a pull, a gentle urge to push upward. It responded, pushing through the soil and feeling the warmth of the sun above. As it emerged from the earth, it began to feel the rain that nourished it, the air that embraced it, and the soil that held it steady. The seed realized that it was not alone, but part of a vast network of life. The flowers that bloomed around it, the animals that passed by, and the birds that sang in the trees, all of these were connected to it, just as it was connected to them. The seed became a beautiful flower, and as it bloomed, it spread its seeds to the earth, continuing the cycle of life. The flower realized that it was never separate from the world, but was always part of a larger, interwoven web of existence. Every moment, every interaction, and every experience was part of a grand, interconnected dance. This story reminds us that, like the seed, we are all part of a larger, interdependent whole. Our lives are intertwined with the lives of others, and our actions ripple out, affecting the world in ways we may not always see. But when we live with awareness of this interconnectedness, we can make choices that nurture and support the web of life. Call to action, recognizing our interconnection. In your own life, take a moment to reflect on the ways in which you are interconnected with the world. How are your actions influencing the lives of others? How can you live more mindfully? Recognizing the interconnected nature of all things. By embracing the truth of interdependence, we can move away from the illusion of separateness and live with greater compassion, understanding, and wisdom. As you move through the world today, remember that you are not alone. You are part of a vast, interconnected web. And every action you take, no matter how small, is a thread in the larger tapestry of life. If you are ready to explore this deeper understanding of the interconnectedness of all things, join us in this journey of mindfulness and compassion. Let's live with awareness, act with kindness, and remember that we are all part of the same great web of life.
B. Chapter 5. The Ultimate Answer, Who Are You? The question, who am I, is one that has echoed through the halls of philosophical debate, religious inquiry, and personal introspection for millennia. In many ways, it is the quintessential question of the human condition. But for many, this search for a concrete, fixed identity, a permanent self, is much like chasing a mirage. The harder we try to grasp it, the more elusive it becomes. We define ourselves by our careers, our relationships, our successes, and failures. But are these things truly who we are? Or is the truth something far more subtle and profound? Buddhism teaches us that the question, who am I, is not meant to lead us to a concrete, final answer, but rather to guide us into a deeper understanding of our nature. The Buddhist teachings point us toward a profound realization. The self we seek is not an object to be found or a destination to be reached, but an ongoing process to be witnessed. The mirage of a fixed self. For most of our lives, we cling to the belief that there is a fixed, permanent I that exists underneath all of our thoughts, actions, and experiences. We identify ourselves with our names, our bodies, our roles in society, and the stories we tell about our past. We are led to believe that there is a singular, unchanging entity at the core of our being. But the Buddha's wisdom teaches us otherwise. Imagine a mirage in a desert, from a distance. It seems real, an oasis, a vision of water, offering relief. But as you approach, it disappears, revealing nothing but sand and heat. The search for a fixed self is much like this mirage. The more we chase it, the more it slips away. Each time we think we have found a permanent I, we realize that it is only another illusion, fading as quickly as it appeared. The Buddha's profound insight was that the self is not a static thing but a constantly changing process. It is an ongoing flow of experiences, thoughts, sensations, and perceptions that arise and fade in each moment. The self is not an object to be grasped or possessed. It is the activity of being itself, a stream of ever-changing experiences. Much like the flow of a river. Just as the river is never the same from one moment to the next, so too are we in constant flux. This concept is encapsulated in the Buddhist understanding of the 5 aggregates, skandhas: form, sensation, perception, mental formations, and consciousness. These aggregates come together to create the illusion of a unified self. But each one is impermanent and constantly in motion. The body changes, feelings arise and dissolve, thoughts come and go, and our awareness shifts moment by moment. When we realize this, the need to define ourselves as a permanent entity begins to loosen, and we start to experience the fluidity of life. The Buddha's middle way, avoiding extremes. In his teachings, the Buddha warned against 2 extreme views regarding the self: eternalism and nihilism. Eternalism is the belief in a fixed, unchanging soul or self that persists forever. Nihilism, on the other hand, is the belief that the self does not exist at all. That there is no continuity or meaning to our experience. The Buddha's middle way, however, teaches us to embrace the fluidity of the self, free from attachment to either extreme. He acknowledged the impermanence of all things, but he also recognized the continuity of consciousness and experience. In the middle way, we find a balance, a recognition that while the self is not permanent, it is also not non-existent. It is a process of becoming, ever-changing and interdependent, without a fixed, unchanging core. By walking the middle way, we free ourselves from the need to define our identity rigidly. We stop clinging to the idea of a permanent I, and open ourselves to the fluidity of life. In each moment, we are not the same person we were a moment ago, but we are still part of the same ongoing process of life. Like the river that flows continuously while always changing. The practice of meditation, witnessing the self. In Buddhist meditation, practitioners are encouraged to observe the rise and fall of sensations, thoughts, perceptions, and consciousness. Through this practice, we begin to notice that the self is not a fixed entity but a dynamic process. As we sit in meditation, we observe thoughts arising and fading, feelings coming and going, and the body shifting. The more we meditate, the more we realize that the self is not something that can be grasped or held onto. It is simply an ongoing stream of experiences. Take a moment and reflect on the process of meditation. You sit down, close your eyes, and begin to focus on your breath. Almost immediately, thoughts arise, perhaps about the past, the future, or even what you're doing in a moment. But instead of identifying with these thoughts, you simply notice them. You see them arise, and you see them fade away. They are like clouds drifting across the sky. They are not permanent, and they do not define who you are. You are the awareness that witnesses them, not the thoughts themselves. This is the essence of Buddhist meditation. To witness the ever-changing nature of the self. When we begin to let go of our attachment to thoughts, feelings, and experiences, we come to realize that we are not defined by any of these things. We are the awareness that observes them, but we are not bound by them. In the practice of vipassana, or insight meditation, this realization becomes even clearer. Practitioners focus on the body and the sensations that arise within it. They observe these sensations: pain, discomfort, pleasure, warmth, cold without attachment or aversion. They see that these sensations come and go, constantly shifting and changing. Through this practice, they come to understand that the body itself is not a permanent self, but an ever-changing process, just like the mind. This realization is not about rejecting the self or denying the reality of our experience. It is about understanding that the self is not something to be grasped or held onto. It is not a fixed identity that we can control or define. Instead, the self is a process of becoming, ever-changing and interdependent. The story of the old man and the river. To illustrate the fluid nature of the self and the importance of letting go of the search for a permanent identity, let me share a story from Buddhist tradition. Once, there was an old man who had lived a long and full life. He had worked hard, raised a family, and accumulated wealth. He had a reputation in his village as a wise and respected elder, someone who had seen much and experienced many things. But as he grew older, he became troubled by the inevitable changes that come with aging. His body grew weaker, his memory began to fade, and his once clear vision became blurry. The identity he had spent so many years cultivating, the hard-working father, the successful businessman, the respected elder, began to feel less certain. One day, the old man decided to seek guidance from a wise monk who lived by the river. He had heard of the monk's ability to see the truth. and wanted to ask him about his growing fear of losing himself. When the old man arrived at the monk's hut, the monk welcomed him with kindness and led him to the riverbank. They sat there in silence for a while, watching the water flow gently by. The old man then asked, "Master, I have lived a long life and have built an identity that I am proud of. But now, as I grow older, I feel like I am losing myself. My body is failing, my mind is weakening, and I am afraid of what I will become. Who am I, if not the person I have been all these years?" The monk smiled softly and pointed to the river. "Look at the river," he said. "Do you see how the water flows, constantly moving, never the same from one moment to the next?" "Yes," the old man replied, "the water is always changing." The monk continued, "And yet, the river is still the river, isn't it? Even though it is never the same from one moment to the next. It remains part of the great flow of life." The old man nodded. But he was still confused. "But how can I know who I am, if I am constantly changing, like the river?" The monk looked at him with compassion. "You are like the river, my friend. You are not the same person from one moment to the next. Your body changes, your thoughts change, and even your feelings change. But just as the river flows, you too are part of the ongoing flow of life. The question, who am I, is not about finding a fixed identity. It is about understanding that you are a process, a stream of experiences, constantly changing and evolving. When you let go of the need to hold on to a fixed self, you open yourself to the freedom of the present moment, where you can experience life as it is, without attachment." The old man sat in silence for a long time, contemplating the monk's words. He realized that his fear of losing himself came from his attachment to a fixed identity. As he let go of that attachment, he felt a deep sense of peace wash over him. He understood that he was not defined by his body, his name, or his past accomplishments. He was part of the great flow of life, ever-changing and ever-present, like the river. The freedom of letting go. The more we let go of our need to define ourselves, the more we open up to the freedom of the present moment. In each moment, we are not a static entity. We are life itself, ever-changing, boundless, and free. By releasing our attachment to a fixed identity, we stop struggling to control or define ourselves. We stop clinging to our past, our roles, our labels. And we allow ourselves to be fully present with whatever arises in each moment. This is the essence of spiritual liberation, the freedom to experience life as it is, without the burden of self-judgment, comparison, or fear. When we let go of the need to define ourselves, we stop grasping at an elusive self, and allow ourselves to become part of the ongoing flow of existence. In doing so, we align ourselves with the true nature of life, fluid, impermanent, and full of endless possibility. Call to action, the path of letting go. If you are ready to experience the freedom that comes from letting go of the need to define yourself, take a moment to reflect on the following questions. What parts of your identity are you holding onto too tightly? How does the need to define yourself create suffering or limitation in your life? What would it be like to embrace the fluid, ever-changing nature of your existence? Let go of the search for a fixed self and allow yourself to experience life in its fullness, free from attachment and fear. Join us in this journey of discovery, and subscribe to explore more teachings on the fluidity of the self and the freedom that comes with embracing the present moment. When you let go of the need to define who you are, you will find the boundless freedom of simply being. Conclusion: embrace the flow of life. As we journey through the teachings of Buddhism, one fundamental truth stands out: the self is not a permanent entity, but a fluid, ever-changing process. The moment we realize this, we are liberated from the weight of attachment and the suffering that often accompanies our obsession with maintaining a fixed identity. The Buddha's insight into the nature of the self challenges us to step away from the rigid structures we impose upon ourselves and instead embrace the flow of life. So much of our suffering comes from holding on to the idea that we must be something constant. Our identity tied to our roles, our possessions, and our achievements. We live in a world that constantly tells us who we should be, what we should accomplish, and how we should present ourselves. But Buddhism invites us to question this narrative. What if the very need to define ourselves, to be something solid and fixed, is the root of our pain? When we let go of this attachment, we find a profound peace in the present moment. The self is not something to be grasped, but an unfolding experience, a fluid process that reveals itself with every breath. Each thought, each feeling, and each sensation arises, only to dissolve and make way for something new. Just like the river that continuously flows, never exactly the same but always the river, so too are we. We are part of the ever-changing flow of existence, and it is in this fluidity that we find our true nature. This understanding offers freedom. Freedom from the constant struggle to define who we are. Freedom from the fear of losing ourselves. Freedom to experience life as it is, without the need to hold on tightly to an identity. When we embrace this flow, we can live with greater peace, acceptance, and joy. We are not static beings, confined by our past or future, but dynamic processes, ever evolving, ever growing, and always in motion. Reflecting on your own experience. Now, I invite you to reflect on your own life. Who are you when no one is watching? Are you the same person when no one is looking? Or do you recognize that your identity is fluid, shifting with each moment? What roles do you play in your life that shape how you view yourself? And when those roles fade, what remains? Consider this. We often define ourselves by the roles we play: father, mother, employee, friend. But what happens when those roles are stripped away? When you are alone, without the expectations of others, who do you become? Is your identity rooted in something more than just your external roles? I encourage you to share your thoughts with us. Take a moment to leave a comment below, telling us how you view your own identity when no one is watching. Do you see yourself as a constant I? Or do you embrace the idea that yourself is always changing? Let's discuss this deeper. Call to action. If this exploration of the self has sparked something within you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Buddhist Stories. Here, we dive into deep reflections and practical Buddhist wisdom to help you navigate life with more awareness, compassion, and inner peace. By subscribing, you'll join a community that seeks to understand the profound truths of our existence and explore the teachings of the Buddha in a way that's both insightful and accessible. Let go of the need for a fixed identity, and embrace the freedom that comes with flowing with the current of existence. Take the first step today: subscribe, join the conversation, and let's continue this journey together. The story of the monk and the river. To tie all of this together, let me share a powerful story from Buddhist tradition that captures the essence of embracing the fluidity of the self. There was once a monk who spent many years in deep meditation by a river. He lived alone, reflecting on the nature of existence and the ever-changing flow of life. One day, a visitor came to him, curious about the monk's peaceful demeanor and the wisdom he exuded. The visitor asked, "Master, who are you when no one is watching? How do you define yourself when no one is around?" The monk smiled gently and gestured toward the river. I am like this river, he said. Constantly flowing, ever changing, and always at peace. The visitor was taken aback. But how can you be at peace if you are always changing? He asked. The monk replied, the river does not resist its flow. Nor does it try to be something it is not. It simply is constantly flowing, moving forward, yet always remaining part of the larger whole. In the same way, I do not try to be something fixed. I am a part of the flow of life, ever changing, but always part of the river. This simple yet profound answer speaks to the heart of Buddhist wisdom. We are like the river, not fixed, not static, but always evolving and yet always connected to the greater flow of existence. When we stop trying to grasp a permanent self and instead flow with life as it is, we find peace in our ever-changing nature. An invitation for the future. As we continue to explore the teachings of the Buddha, we will dive deeper into how understanding impermanence and the fluid nature of the self can help us navigate life's challenges. In upcoming videos, we will explore practical ways to embody these teachings, bringing mindfulness and compassion into our daily lives. So, what's next on this journey? In our next video, we'll discuss how we can practice living without attachment, how letting go of the need to control our identities can help us embrace the present moment fully and experience true freedom. Until then, remember, the I you hold onto is not static. You are the river, constantly changing, ever moving. Embrace the flow of life and the peace that comes with it. Thank you for joining me today. And stay tuned for more insights on how to live a life of freedom and peace right here on Buddhist Stories.